Welcome back. Let's talk more about the spat, a very public one, between Musk and Trump. The former allies, friends, fighting on camera and social media as senators weighed the president's tax bill, which sparked the breakup. Joining us now to discuss is Marc Short, former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. Marc first served as White House Legislative Affairs Director in the first Trump administration. He's now board chair of Advancing American Freedom. Does this put the bill at risk, Marc?
Sarah, thanks for having me. Look, I don't think it helps the bill. The reality is that the House passed it by one vote, 215 to 214. So any sort of water that it takes on is unhelpful. And I think that, Elon put a lot of money into the election in 2024. And so if there's a threat that that's considered a factor for some members of 26, it doesn't help. Having said that, I still think that ultimately this bill passes. I think the threat of a $4.5 trillion tax increase has always been the driver here and still remains the biggest driver that'll compel Republicans to actually pass the extension of tax relief from 2017.
So do you think, Musk has more to lose than Trump? That was sort of the market's first take.
I think that's probably true. I think that's probably true, but I don't think it's helpful for either side. And I don't think it's helpful for the party to have this distraction when this is the president's largest legislative, vehicle for this year, and really the only legislative vehicle for this year. And so having this battle play out right now is certainly not productive or helpful to the cause.
No, it's helping Democrats. They're practically celebrating.
Yeah. I mean, look, it is. I think that I don't see that Elon's going to switch parties. I think, as you know, much of what drove Elon was kind of a more libertarian concern about where the previous administration had gone, and also on social issues like the trans issues. And so I don't think that's going to change. But certainly, if his money is withheld from Republicans, that's a big change in 2026. But again, ultimately, I think that Republicans know that a $4.5 trillion tax increase on the American people is not what they want to see happen, and they'll come together to actually get this done. Now, I think that some of these deadlines are pretty artificial, and so the notion you're going to get this done by July 4th, I think, Sarah, in many cases is really driven because I think there's more anxiety on Capitol Hill for Republicans about this trade agenda and concerns in the second half of the year that this trade agenda of the president's is going to have negative impacts on the economy, and therefore they want to get this bill done sooner. But if it misses a July 4th deadline, it's not like it's the end of the world. They really have until the end of the year to complete this, and I think ultimately they will.
So if you were giving advice to either side, to Trump or Musk, what would it be, Marc, in terms of this current feud? Given neither one of them backed down, and they both can be quite vindictive.
Well, David, I think at the end of the day, look, I don't think this surprises anybody as to where it ended up. I think the escalation in the Godzilla versus King Kong feud certainly, I think, surprised people from just 2 days ago being given a key to the White House and now saying we're going to take away all government contracts, and a couple of days ago saying he's the greatest president ever, to supporting impeachment. That's a pretty dramatic escalation.
Yes, it is.
But I think at the end of the day, it's probably best that they both put their phones down and stop tweeting at each other. I think that's probably what's best for the cause here.
Marc, is there precedent for the president to look past this kind of quote-unquote disloyalty?
It doesn't seem so. I think that the president does like to have sort of made-for-TV moments, and so I think he likes to have reunions. But I think that when he's, separated from previous people in the first administration, whether or not that was Jeff Sessions or Bill Barr or Mattis, I think that these things usually continue on. So it's probably not much pathway to reunification here. But again, I think that as long as there's not the continued feuding, they can still get this bill done.
Yeah, he's more likely to pull their Secret Service protection than anything else. Although Musk doesn't have to worry about that. He can pay for plenty. How important is the money from Musk to the Republican Party, Marc, in terms of even congressional races and sort of across the board? Because Musk was pointing to it in some of the tweets yesterday.
Look, I think it's important. I do think that some of this is exaggerated because I think most Americans, like where that money usually goes is into paid commercials. And the reality is that evidence shows fewer and fewer Americans actually look at those paid TV commercials. There is money that can be invested into a lot more of supporting, feet on the ground and helping to get people out to vote. And I think it matters, but I also think that it's probably a little bit dramatized as to what that impact was in 24.
He does also control a pretty powerful platform as well in X. That's not to be forgotten also.
Absolutely. Right.
But it's beyond credits, right, for Musk's businesses. He needs regulation as he's about to roll out his self-driving robo-taxis and compete with Waymo. His company is the only U.S. space firm that's regularly transporting astronauts to the International Space Station. And there are a lot of issues here that it could affect Musk's business and plans.
I mean, it goes beyond the economy, Sarah. It's also a national security issue, obviously, with space and exploration there. That is important to us. But, I mean, it is fascinating to see somebody whose businesses were built, in many cases, on the backs of American taxpayers and subsidies for electric vehicles and direct payments for space exploration. He did come out yesterday, I saw, and say that, go ahead and keep in the bill the elimination of those subsidies, which I think is great. And I think he's right to say we should continue to expand elimination of those subsidies across the board. And I think that Elon's done a really effective job of pointing out waste in government spending that I think has been a service. But again, ultimately, I think he's wrong on not wanting to get this bill passed because I'm not so sure, honestly, guys, how much growth there is in the bill. I think in 2017, when you lowered corporate rates from 35 to 21, that was a huge juice and a huge impact. What we're talking about now is more or less just extending that same tax relief. I know there's some full expensing. I think that's exaggerated what that impact is to me. But if you don't pass it and you actually have $4.5 trillion of additional taxes, I think that would have a huge negative impact on the economy.
Are you surprised, Mark, that the DOGE rescissions are $9 billion? I mean, if I had thrown that number at you 3 months ago, I mean, you probably would have laughed at me, right? The hopes were much more aspirational.
No, actually, Carl, I think when I was on with you guys a few months ago, I'd always said that, it's good to expose these cuts, but the executive branch can't do that on its own, because if you have that precedent, then a future Democrat administration come in and say, you know what, I'm just going to unilaterally decide we're not going to fund Customs and Border Patrol. So you always needed this legislated, and that was always going to be a problem because Washington doesn't like to cut spending. And the real drivers of our deficits are entitlements, and nobody's really talking about that. But the White House put forward a $9 billion number just as a test because, honestly, I think they're looking to set up a battle in the second half of this year on the Impoundment Act. This current administration believes strongly they have the authority to impound funds that Congress appropriates. And I think it's setting up a much bigger legal battle in the second half of the year because I don't think Congress is going to be supportive of just the executive branch unilaterally impounding funds. And so for them, if the $9 billion package doesn't go forward, it helps build their case to say, see, Congress can never do that. That's why we need to impound the funds ourselves.
Well, we'll talk to you between now and then if that heats up. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you joining us on this big story, Marc Short.